The cold bit through everything. Even at 25,000 feet, where the air was thin enough to make a man dizzy and the temperature dropped to 40 below zero, Sergeant James Jimmy Holloway could feel it seeping through his heated suit, through his gloves, through the sheepskin collar pressed against his neck. He hunched in the waist gun position of the B-17 Flying Fortress, hands wrapped around the 50 caliber machine gun, watching the endless grey sky stretch beyond the plexiglass window. It was March 1944, and the 8th Air Force was grinding through mission after mission over occupied Europe. Jimmy had been flying for 8 months now, 23 missions stamped into his logbook, each one a test of nerves and luck. The bomber, affectionately called Memphis Belle II by her crew, rumbled through the air with the steady drone that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. Around him, the other 8 crew members sat at their stations, silent except for the occasional crackle of radio chatter or the metallic click of ammunition belts being checked one more time. Fighters, 2 o'clock high. The voice of Lieutenant Anderson, the co-pilot, cut through the intercom with sharp urgency. Jimmy's stomach tightened. He swung his gun toward the right side of the aircraft, squinting against the harsh sunlight that reflected off the clouds below. 3 dark shapes materialized from the glare. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, their yellow noses unmistakable against the pale sky. They were diving toward the formation, closing the distance with terrifying speed. "Here they come," someone shouted. The sky erupted. Tracers streaked through the air like deadly fireworks, crisscrossing between the bombers and the attacking fighters. The sound was deafening even through the layers of leather and fleece covering Jimmy's ears. The acrid smell of cordite filled the confined space as he opened fire, the gun bucking against his shoulder with familiar violence. His shots traced a path toward the lead fighter, leading it just like he'd practiced 1,000 times on the ground. The Messerschmitt pulled up sharply, its pilot clearly skilled, and rolled away from the stream of bullets. Another came from below, streaking upward with its cannons blazing. Orange flashes erupted from its wings. Jimmy pivoted, tracking it, but the angle was wrong. The fighter was too fast, too close. That's when he felt it. The explosion was simultaneous with a sensation like being punched in the face by a freight train. The world turned white, then red, then a chaos of spinning shapes and searing pain. Shrapnel from a 20mm cannon round had struck the window frame beside him and exploded inward, sending fragments of metal and plexiglass into his face. He stumbled backward, hands flying to his eyes, the gun forgotten. "Jimmy! Jimmy, you hit." It was Staff Sergeant Bobby Chen, the other waist gunner, his voice high with panic. Jimmy couldn't answer, couldn't see. His right eye was a fountain of agony, and something warm and thick was running down his face. Blood. So much blood. He pressed his hands against the wound, feeling the jagged edges of torn skin, the terrible wrongness where his eye should be. "Get the medic. Get Ramirez back here now." Bobby was screaming into the intercom, abandoning his own gun to grab Jimmy as he collapsed against the fuselage. The rest of the mission passed in a blur of pain and morphine. Technical Sergeant Carlos Ramirez, the ball turret gunner who doubled as their medic, climbed up from his cramped position beneath the aircraft and worked on Jimmy with steady hands, despite the bomber's violent shaking as flak burst around them. He packed the wound with sulfur powder, wrapped bandages around Jimmy's head, and jabbed him with morphine from their limited supply. "You're going to be okay," Ramirez kept saying, though his voice carried the tremor of a man who'd seen too many injuries that weren't okay. "You're going to make it, Jimmy. Stay with me." The world became a distant thing, muffled and strange. Jimmy was aware of the bomber landing, of hands carrying him, of the jarring ride in an ambulance across the English countryside. The base hospital at Thorpe Abbotts materialized like something from a dream. All white walls and antiseptic smells, and doctors with tired eyes who'd seen hundreds of wounded airmen pass through their doors. The next 3 days existed in fragments. Surgeons operated to remove what remained of his right eye and repair the damaged socket. Nurses changed his bandages and monitored him for infection. The morphine ebbed and flowed, taking the pain with it, but leaving him adrift in a fog where time had no meaning. On the 4th day, he woke up clear-headed for the first time. The hospital ward was quiet, filled with the soft sounds of men recovering from their own battles with gravity and metal and fire. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, painting rectangles of gold across the wooden floor. Jimmy lay in his cot, staring at the ceiling with his left eye while his right remained buried beneath layers of gauze and bandages. "You're awake." Captain William Nash. His pilot pulled up a chair beside the bed. The captain was a tall man from Kansas, with steady hands and a calm demeanor that had kept them alive through 23 missions. His presence was solid, reassuring. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a train," Jimmy rasped. His throat was dry, his voice unfamiliar. Nash handed him a cup of water. "The docs say you're lucky. The shrapnel missed your brain by less than an inch. You're going home, Jimmy. You've earned it." Home, the word should have filled him with relief, with joy. Instead, it sat in his chest like a stone. Home meant leaving the crew. Home meant giving up, being done, sitting out the rest of the war while other men fought and died. Home meant admitting he was broken. "I don't want to go home," Jimmy said quietly. Nash leaned back, studying him with those calm gray eyes. "You lost an eye, son. No one expects you to keep flying. You've done your part. 23 missions isn't 35. The magic number. 35 missions and you went home, your tour complete." Jimmy had 12 left. 12 more chances to do something that mattered. "I can still fight, Captain, with one eye." Nash's voice was gentle but skeptical. "I can adapt. I can learn." Jimmy sat up, ignoring the spike of pain the movement caused. "The crew needs every gun we have. You know that. We're getting torn apart up there." It was true, and they both knew it. The air war over Europe was reaching a crescendo of violence. Every mission saw bombers falling from the sky, crews lost to fighters and flak. Every empty bunk in the barracks was a reminder that survival was a matter of luck, as much as skill. Nash was silent for a long moment, considering. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll talk to the colonel. But Jimmy, if you're going to do this, you need to prove you can still hit something. One eye or not." The doctors tried to ground him. The psychologists questioned his sanity. The brass wanted to ship him stateside and pin a Purple Heart on his chest for the cameras. But Jimmy was stubborn, and Nash was persuasive. And after 2 weeks of recuperation and a battery of tests that would have broken a lesser man, they gave him a conditional clearance. He had 4 weeks to prove he could still function as a gunner. If he couldn't, he'd be on the next transport home. Bobby Chen found him at the practice range on a grey afternoon when the clouds hung low over the English countryside. Jimmy was standing before a crude mock-up of a waist gun position, firing at targets that rolled across a field on rails, trying to track them through the sight with his remaining eye. He was missing. Badly. The depth perception was gone. His brain, trained for 26 years to process information from 2 eyes, kept lying to him about distances. The targets seemed to shift and jump, too close and too far simultaneously. His shots went wide, missing by feet instead of inches. "This isn't working," Jimmy muttered, lowering the gun. Frustration burned in his chest, hot and acidic. Bobby approached, carrying a wooden crate. "Maybe you're doing it wrong. There's only one way to aim a gun, is there?" Bobby set the crate down and pulled out a small rectangular mirror, the kind a woman might use for makeup, still in its leather case. "I've been thinking about your problem. You can't judge distance with one eye because you need both eyes for triangulation. But what if you could see from 2 angles at once?" Jimmy stared at the mirror, not understanding. Bobby held it up beside the gun sight. "Look through the sight with your good eye. But put this mirror here angled, so you can see the target from a slightly different perspective at the same time. Your brain might be able to piece together the depth information from those 2 angles, even if one's just a reflection." It was crazy. It was brilliant. It was desperate. They spent the next hour rigging the mirror to the gun sight with wire and adhesive tape, adjusting the angle by fractions of degrees. Jimmy peered through the sight, seeing the target both directly and reflected in the mirror positioned a few inches to the side. His brain fought the conflicting information at first, the image fragmenting into a confusing double vision. But slowly, painfully, something clicked. The reflected image and the direct image began to merge in his perception, overlapping in a way that gave him back a ghost of depth perception. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't natural. But when he fired at the next target, his shots walked closer to the mark. "Again," Bobby said. They practiced until darkness fell, and the range officer kicked them off the field. The next day they were back at dawn, and the day after, and the day after that. Jimmy's accuracy improved incrementally, his brain rewiring itself to process this strange new way of seeing. The mirror became an extension of him, as essential as the gun itself. The rest of the crew watched his progress with a mixture of admiration and concern. Ramirez helped him waterproof the mirror against the condensation that formed at high altitude. Lieutenant Anderson, the co-pilot who'd called out those fighters back in March, fabricated a more robust mounting bracket from scrap metal in the machine shop. Even the bombardier, a quiet kid from Oregon named Fletcher, contributed by painting the mirror's edges black to reduce glare. On the 28th day, Jimmy stood at the range and put 15 consecutive rounds into targets at varying distances, compensating for windage and movement with the instinctive precision that had made him one of the best gunners in the squadron before his injury. The range officer, a grizzled sergeant who'd been flying since the North Africa campaign, watched in silence, then nodded. "I've seen stranger things work in combat," he said. "But son, you understand that up there, when the lead starts flying, this gets a whole lot harder." "Yes, Sergeant. And you're willing to bet your life and the lives of your crew on that mirror trick?" Jimmy met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Sergeant." The range officer signed off on his qualification. 3 days later, Jimmy was back in Memphis Belle II, settling into his familiar position at the waist gun as the bomber taxied toward the runway. The pre-mission briefing had been grim. A daylight raid on a ball-bearing factory deep in Germany, a target the Luftwaffe would defend with everything they had. The losses were expected to be heavy. Nash's voice came through the intercom as the engines roared to full power. "All right, boys, you know the drill. Keep your eyes open, watch each other's backs, and let's bring this bird home in one piece." The takeoff was smooth despite the heavy bomb load. Memphis Belle II climbed into the gray English morning, joining the stream of bombers that formed up over the channel. Hundreds of B-17s filled the sky, their contrails writing white lines across the heavens. Fighter escorts, P-47 Thunderbolts with their distinctive bubble canopies, weaved through the formation like protective sheepdogs. Jimmy checked his gun for the 100th time, his hand reaching up unconsciously to touch the mirror mounted beside the sight. The familiar weight of the bandage over his ruined eye was a constant reminder of what he'd lost, but the mirror was a reminder of what he'd gained back, however imperfectly. "You good over there?" Bobby asked from his own position across the fuselage. "Good as I'll ever be." The English coastline fell away beneath them, replaced by the dark water of the channel. Jimmy's breath came in controlled measures, fogging the oxygen mask strapped to his face. At this altitude, without oxygen, a man would pass out in minutes, die in 10. Everything was hostile up here. The cold, the thin air, the unforgiving physics of metal and gravity. They crossed into France. The landscape below was a patchwork of fields and forests, towns reduced to clusters of buildings, no bigger than matchboxes. Somewhere down there, people were living under occupation, waiting for liberation. The bombs in Memphis Belle II's belly were part of that promise, a thunderous declaration that the Allies were coming. Flak, 12 o'clock level. The call came from Fletcher in the nose. Black clouds bloomed ahead, each one marking where an 88mm shell had exploded. The bombers plowed through the storm of shrapnel, holding formation even as pieces of metal punched through aluminum skin. One B-17 in the formation ahead took a direct hit, its wing shearing off in a spray of debris. Jimmy watched helpless as it tumbled from the sky, 3 parachutes blossoming from the dying aircraft. "Steady." Nash's voice was calm despite the violence around them. "Hold formation." The flak intensified as they approached the target. The factory was barely visible through the smoke and clouds, but the bombardiers were locked onto it, with their Norden bomb sights, calculating drop points with mechanical precision. Memphis Belle II shuddered as the bombs released, the sudden loss of weight making the aircraft leap upward. "Bombs away," Fletcher called. "Let's get out of here." The formation banked, turning for home. That's when the fighters came. They appeared from above and ahead, a swarm of Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, diving through the American fighter screen with suicidal aggression. The Luftwaffe pilots knew what was at stake. They would throw everything they had at the bombers. Jimmy's world narrowed to the gun sight and the mirror. A 109 flashed across his field of view, banking hard. He tracked it, the direct view and the reflected view merging in that strange double perception he'd trained himself to see. He led the target, squeezed the trigger. The gun roared. Tracers reached out. The fighter's canopy shattered. Smoke poured from its engine. It rolled inverted and fell away. Good shooting! Bobby's voice was exultant, but there was no time to celebrate. Another fighter was coming in from below, its cannons winking orange. Jimmy pivoted, finding it in his sight. The mirror showed him the angle, the distance he fired. The fighter pulled up hard, trailing smoke, its attack broken. The battle became a chaotic swirl of speed and violence. Fighters everywhere, coming from all angles, pressing the attack despite the withering fire from the bomber formation. Jimmy moved through the engagement with mechanical precision, his training and his makeshift sight working in concert. Track, lead, fire. Track, lead, fire. The mirror gave him back his edge. Let him judge the distance and deflection even with one eye. A Focke-Wulf came at them head-on, a closing speed of over 500 miles per hour. Jimmy saw it in both views, the perspective from the mirror giving him the depth he needed. He opened fire early, walking his shots toward the oncoming fighter. The Focke-Wulf's wings sparkled as its guns fired back, but Jimmy held steady, ignoring the impacts hammering into the fuselage around him. His stream of bullets found the mark. The fighter's propeller disintegrated. It flipped end over end, passing so close to Memphis Belle II that Jimmy could see the pilot's face, frozen in shock before it was gone. "Jesus, Jimmy," Ramirez shouted from the ball turret. That was too close. The attacks continued. A 109 tried to come in from the right rear quarter, a classic approach. Jimmy caught it in his sight, the mirror showing him exactly how much lead to give. His shots tore into the fighter's wing root. Pieces came off. It rolled away, trailing debris. Minutes stretched into eternities. The gun barrel was glowing hot, the ammunition belts running low. Jimmy's shoulder ached from the gun's recoil. His hands cramped on the grips. But he kept shooting, kept tracking, kept putting rounds on target. The mirror, that simple piece of glass and wire, had become his eyes, his edge, his salvation. A formation of 3 109s came at them in a coordinated attack, trying to overwhelm the defensive fire. Jimmy took the lead fighter. Bobby took the left wing man. Both went down smoking. The third broke off, its nerve gone. "They're breaking," Anderson called. "The fighters are pulling back." The Luftwaffe attack ended as suddenly as it had begun, the surviving fighters peeling away, low on ammunition and fuel. The bomber formation, ragged and bloodied but still flying, continued west toward England and home. Memphis Belle II had taken hits. Jagged holes punched through her skin. Hydraulic fluid leaking from damaged lines, but her engines still ran and her controls still responded. Jimmy slumped against the fuselage, exhausted. His face was numb from the cold despite the heated suit, his oxygen mask crusted with frost. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him hollow and shaking. "Damage report," Nash's voice came through, steady as always. The crew checked in one by one. Some damage, but nothing critical. No casualties. They'd made it. As the English coast appeared through the clouds, Bobby came over to Jimmy's position. He looked at the mirror, still mounted to the gun sight, still intact despite everything. "How many do you think you got?" Jimmy shook his head. "I wasn't counting, but others were." When Memphis Belle II landed and the crew climbed out onto the tarmac, the ground crews were already swarming over the aircraft, counting the damage, assessing what needed repair. The gun camera footage would be reviewed, each claim verified against the film evidence. It was how the Air Force kept accurate records, separated confirmed kills from probables. 3 days later, Captain Nash found Jimmy in the mess hall. The pilot had a strange expression on his face, something between disbelief and pride. "The gun camera footage came back," Nash said, sitting down across from Jimmy. "They've confirmed 12 kills for you in that engagement. 12 fighters, Jimmy, in a 20-minute window." The mess hall went quiet. Other airmen turned to stare. 12 fighters was impossible. It was the kind of number that got exaggerated in bars and stories, not something that actually happened. "The mirror worked," Jimmy said simply. Word spread through the base like wildfire. The one-eyed gunner who'd shot down 12 fighters with a make-up mirror and sheer determination became instant legend. Reporters showed up wanting interviews and photographs. Jimmy endured them with stoic patience, though he deflected most of the credit to Bobby Chen for coming up with the mirror idea in the first place. What mattered more than the medals or the attention were the visits from other wounded gunners, men who'd lost eyes or suffered damage to their vision and thought their fighting days were over. Jimmy showed them the mirror. explained the technique, helped them rig their own setups. Some couldn't make it work, the injury too severe or the adaptation too difficult. But others did. The mirror technique spread through the 8th Air Force, a small innovation born from desperation that gave wounded men a chance to keep fighting. Memphis Belle II flew 11 more missions before the war in Europe ended. Jimmy was at his gun for every one of them, the mirror mounted beside his sight, his accuracy and timing honed to a razor's edge by constant practice and the brutal teacher of combat. He shot down 6 more fighters before VE Day, bringing his final tally to 18 confirmed kills, making him one of the top-scoring aerial gunners in the 8th Air Force. But the numbers never mattered to him, as much as the simpler fact that he'd kept flying, kept fighting, kept protecting his crew. When Memphis Belle II touched down for the last time in May 1945, her fuselage covered in mission marks and patched over battle damage, Jimmy carefully removed the mirror from his gun sight and put it in his pocket. It was just a piece of glass and wire, but it had given him back his purpose when everything else had been taken away. It had proven that adaptation and determination could overcome even devastating loss. It had shown him and everyone who heard his story that being broken didn't mean being finished. The English countryside was green and beautiful that spring, free from the sound of bombers and the sight of contrails. Jimmy stood on the tarmac, looking up at the clear sky, and felt the weight of the mirror in his pocket. The war was over. He was going home. And somewhere, another wounded soldier would hear his story and realize that they too could find a way forward. That innovation and stubborn refusal to quit could turn disadvantage into edge. The mirror had made him a legend, but more importantly, it had made him whole again in the ways that mattered. Not his body. That would always carry the scars of what he'd lost. But his spirit, his purpose, his belief that he still had something to contribute, those things the mirror had reflected back to him, clearer than any sight or scope ever could. Years later, when people asked Jimmy about the war, about the impossible feat of shooting down 12 fighters in 5 minutes with one eye and a mirror, he would always tell them the same thing. The mirror wasn't magic. It was just a tool. The real weapon had been the refusal to give up, the willingness to adapt, and the support of the crew who'd helped him find a way to keep fighting. And in the end, that was the story worth telling. Not just one man's defiance of injury and odds, but the testament to human ingenuity and the stubborn resilience of the spirit when faced with impossible circumstances. The mirror had been the method, but the determination had been the real miracle.